What family secret did you learn that totally shocked you? My favorite uncle cheated on my auntie, ended up knocking the woman up. She had the child and my uncle was forced to tell my aunt. Aunt divorced my uncle. He became an alcoholic and I had absolutely no idea. I thought all the times we were going for car rides as a kid, he purposely drove crazy because it was entertaining for me and my cousins, but it turned out he was just plastered. My father had an affair with his brother's wife, so my cousin is also my brother. My cousin doesn't know though. Grandma let this slip whilst wasted. I didn't find out until recently, in my 30s. So at this age pretty much nothing shocks you. But it would have shocked me in my teens, when my mother was super religious, warning us against premarital sex. In my early 20s, she tried to stop my girlfriend and I from living together when we moved to a city where we knew no one. Obviously, we lived together, but we had to hide it from her when she came to visit, when some unmarried friends of mine had a baby unexpectedly, and the child was born with a physical handicap. She even insinuated to me that it was punishment from God for having a baby out of wedlock. So guess what? A few months ago, my aunt mentioned in passing that the reason my parents got married after only knowing each other 4 months was because my mother was pregnant. She ended up miscarrying, which is why we'd never figured it out before. Found a Salem witch in the family tree. Not really a secret, just forgotten. Not my family, but I thought I'd contribute. Friend turns 15, and she's told she is adopted. Turns out that both her parents died in a car crash when she was just a baby, and her uncle adopted her and raised her. Told her that both parents were dead. A year later, a man messages her on Facebook saying that he's her half-brother. Turns out the dad lived through the car crash and later remarried. Her adopted parents were lying to her as they knew all along. The dad just didn't want to keep her. That's the secret, so to speak. However, the story continues. As her biological father wanted to meet her, she flies out to meet him, stays with him, meet his wife and her half-siblings, struggles with the idea of reconnecting with him, because she both loathes and loves him. Loathes him for not wanting her and getting a new family, loves him for wanting to make a difference in her life and reconnect. She takes the plunge anyway. 6 months later he dies from lung cancer. Life's cruel joke on her. That my aunt wasn't born looking like that. When she was younger, some kids in the neighborhood ganged up on her and attacked her with a 2x4. I never knew, and once I found out I just felt so sorry for her. I was never told what happened to the attackers. One is mine. One is my friend's. Mine. Uncle killed a man in the old country. Gang fight. Picked up one of those big cigarette garbage things and hit another dude in the head. He did time in jail and was disowned by his family. My mom is the only person to visit him. My friend. He was told his parents died. Turns out his dad is his uncle and the woman who raised him, his aunt, is actually his mom. Edit. Old country is Taiwan. Edit 2. It's a smoking can. Thanks. Great grandpa was not murdered. He actually committed suicide. My great grandfather was an abusive piece of it and ended up murdering 3 of my grandaunts and wounded another. He then ended up killing himself after a standoff with the police. My great grandfather may have murdered my great grandmother because he believed that my grandfather was the product of an affair. I don't know whether the affair was true, but I know that on his deathbed he still believed it. His last words to my grandfather were, "I never liked you. Yeah, no? Because you weren't mine." My white Jewish grandfather was once part of a black gang. You might need to draw a diagram to understand this one. My dad was born when my grandma was 18 and my grandpa was 14. He never looked like his dad and always thought his mom had an affair. For context, my dad's family is all Lebanese, but he is very fair-skinned, which was partially why he assumed it had been an affair. When his dad's father, my great-grandfather, was on his deathbed due to cancer, a relative confessed to my dad that his grandfather was actually his father. My dad had my stepmom take hair out of his real father's head and had it sent for DNA testing, which confirmed it. Yeah, little morbid if you ask me. So basically, my grandma had an affair with a married man when she was 18. Had 1, possibly 2, children with him. Then married his son and had another 4 kids. So my dad's siblings are both his siblings and his niece's nephews. And the man who raised him is actually his brother. Yeah, I don't talk to that side of the family anymore. My aunt with a very holier than thou attitude has been having a 40+ year affair with a childhood sweetheart. This is a person that was always quick to criticize other people's family issues and tried so hard to present her and her family as perfect. Her husband is an arsehole to our family and she lets him completely get away with it. I guess we know why now. Maybe an inverse sort of deal. But my family were apparently millionaires in the late 1800s. I guess they had always been very wealthy. But between that wealth getting split up every generation and my family living on the run for many generations, all that money was gone by the time I came around. Only thing left was a chunk of property in Mexico that is completely worthless aside from a small bit of money from it cause there's a highway going through it. This totally shocked me because in my lifetime my family has been quite poor. Full on redneck on top of that. And lots of issues with addiction. Always knew grandma died before I was born. Just never knew it was grandpa who murdered her. My grandma inherited several $100,000 from her stepdad. The juicy part is that to this day, no one knows how he got it. No one even knew he had that kind of money until he died. Since I'm from the south, my guess is rum running or something like that, but we don't know and likely never will. Our family is ultra Catholic, religious, and adept at family secrets. When I was 11, I found out one of my uncles, his wife, my auntie, and their daughter, my cousin, then age 10, died the year before I was born. Killed by a drunk driver. Their surviving children, my 2 cousins, were adopted by another aunt uncle and being raised as their own biological children. When I was 14, I found an old wedding album at my grandma's house of my mother's first wedding. She was married in 1959 when she was 19 to a man from a wealthy family. I had no idea that my father was her second husband. When I was 17, my mother revealed that my older brother and sister were adopted. And not just adopted, but adopted during her first marriage. I had no idea they weren't my biological siblings. And they had never spilled the beans either. When I was 19, I found out that my father had molested my oldest sister. My sister told my mother when it happened, and my mother chose to call her a liar and had her placed in a foster home. When she was in foster care I was about 7. My mother told me at that time that she was placed in foster care because she was a bad girl. My mother chose my father over her daughter, and exposed me and the rest of my siblings to possible abuse by keeping him with us. There's a shitload more, but that's all I feel like writing now. My great-grandfather was a quiet, kind man and treasurer for his chapter of the Elks Lodge in Texas. He was attacked on his way home from an Elks Lodge meeting. He suffered amnesia and regained consciousness as a sailor on his way to Haiti. After landing, he lived in the country for a few months before getting into a bar brawl with a police officer and getting knocked out. He regained consciousness in jail, with a newfound memory of who he was. He told this tale to a priest from jail, who believed him and wanted to help. The priest wrote my great-grandmother and the American government and somehow convinced the Haitian government to let him return to America. He returned to my great-grandmother, had 2 children, and was a law-abiding citizen for the rest of his life. This story is so unbelievable that when my mother told it to me 6 months ago I was convinced it was a hoax. She has documents, the letters from the priest and others, and testimonials of his friends that say this behavior was uncharacteristic. I dunno. Crazy man. Not so much a family secret I learned, but when I learned our family secret wasn't so secret at all. Growing up my grandparents would make popovers for every family gathering. For whatever reason my parents told me that popovers were our family's secret recipe. Or maybe I was just a stupid kid and thought a secret recipe meant nobody else made that food at all. Anyway, fast forward about 20 years when my wife and I were at a restaurant and they had popovers on the menu. I wondered out loud how this restaurant knew our family's secret recipe. My wife got confused and asked to explain. Whereupon I immediately realized how dumb I was. She will never let me forget that. Not mine, but in my wife's family her great uncle was killed by his wife and the hired hand. Poison was assumed as he was just found dead in the field. They were farmers. His wife married the red-headed hired hand and 8 months after the death she birthed a red-headed son. Everyone in the family and the neighborhood knew except I guess. The RCMP. This was around 1935 in rural Alberta. That great-grandpa was a decorated soldier who fought in the Indian Regiment of British troops in World War I. In reality, he was a cook who deserted after seeing men sent to attack machine guns with their bodies. Him and a bunch of others noped the duck out of there while stealing a bunch of supplies. This was corroborated by the other deserters that returned with him. Took them a few years to get from France to Vadodara in the current state of Gujarat, India. They sold the guns and rations along the way for money, and great-grandpa picked up an STD from a Iraqi whore. Luckily grandpa was born before he left. They blame the STD on why he went funny in the head towards his end. Also, the little bit of money he brought back from the stolen and sold army gear helped my grandpa buy some land and kickstart my family fortune so that we could move out of the untouchable class. I found out very recently that my maiden name, and subsequently rest of my family's name, was supposed to be completely different but was changed by deed poll when my grandfather was 11 by his stepfather. So before my father, we aren't actually related to anyone with this surname. It means nothing to our heritage or whatever. So, ever since I started living in apartments for myself, I've had these big pink towels, and every time someone brought it up I've told this story. When I got the first apartment, I went to visit my grandparents with my mom so we could raid her basements for stuff she had lying around that I could use in my new home. And among the stuff that we found were these giant boxes of big pink towels and jasmine incense. Now, the towels I didn't question, but my grandparents didn't seem like the type to use incense, let alone in bulk. So I asked about it, and when I did, my mom and my grandma shared a look and one said to the other, I guess he's old enough to know. So the story goes that my grandpa, amongst other things, ran 2 shopping centers. At one point, one of these shopping centers had a massage parlor. They seemed alright and always paid their rent. Then one day my grandpa gets a call that eyewitness accounts went something like this. Hello, yes, this is, yes, what, whorehouse? What do you mean I'm running a whorehouse? Apparently, this was a full-service massage parlor and the owner split once the cops got wind of it, leaving behind the whole operation. So my grandpa technically became the owner of a very large supply of pink towels, jasmine incense, baby oil, and tissues, and never one to throw things away. He kept all of it in his basement, and they were pretty good towels. So I took a bunch and some of the jasmine incense. I may call them for more at some point. My family owned black slaves. We're Native American. I was adopted by the man I always knew was dad. I was always asked, did you think of him differently after you found out? My response has and always will be yes. I respect him a hell of a lot more than I ever did before. That my grandmother didn't get a bad neck back from poor posture. Grandfather beat her for spending his savings while away working out of town. She turned into a cripple over the course of 30 years and committed suicide last February. Grandfather has been heavily depressed witnessing it all unfold. In my early 20s, I figured out that my oldest sister was molested by my dad a couple of years before I was conceived. This was obviously a big issue to deal with for a couple of reasons. For starters, my dad is just a horrible human being. But I also hold my mom accountable because she stayed with him even though she quickly learned that it had happened. Imagine, if you will, the knowledge that, had your mom done the right thing, you surely would not exist. That's what I live with. Not only should my mom have left my dad the second she found out, but she should have had him arrested. I should not exist. But, to me, the real problem is with my sister. She is now in her mid-40s and, at this point, I'm certain she will never be able to form healthy relationships even with her own family members. My siblings and I are certain she has borderline personality disorder and might even suffer from narcissism, and we consequently are frequently subjected to the abuse she heaps on us. At this point, we don't put up with it. We want her to get help and choose not to enable her, but our mom is also poorly treated by her, and she refuses to cut ties. I had always known that my grandmother, while president of her sorority in college, threw a girl's application in the sewer because the girl was grossly overweight and socially awkward. Grandma then lied to the rest of the sorority that the wind blew the application into the sewer. Only recently did I learn that the girl whose application she lost was Linda Bird Johnson, the daughter of the President of the United States. My grandmother, as I knew her, was a hyper-religious Christian woman that had every bit of conservative 1950s social viewpoints. She was racist, sexist, etc. Found out she was pimped out at 16. Got pregnant by the pimp. She didn't want the kids as her father would kill her as they were mixed race. So the pimp took custody and moved to a different state. She was the door kicker in a motorcycle gang. Her brother killed a guy and is serving life in prison. She was part of the same gang. My uncle being a murderer wasn't a shock as he's been imprisoned since before I was born and I had visited him when I was young. That my great-grandpa cheated on my great-grandma with a neighbor and she ended up getting pregnant. The affair didn't end until my great-grandma, who had no education, driver's license or job, left with my grandma and her brother. She went back and he continued to be an abusive, cheating asshole until he died when I was 7. Grandma lived for another 15 years and said those years were the best years of her life because she was free. Edit. Added a word.